Hi guys, it's me, Tom, back from the wilderness. Yeah, this is the first time I've made a video for quite a few months now. So I hope there's still people out there watching and they haven't all left me on my own. So first of all, I just want to say hi, back again, and I just want to say a big thank you to anyone who has reached out to me these past few months. I've had quite a few messages actually from people writing to me, and I want to say thank you for doing so, and secondly, sorry that I have if I haven't got back to you. I've had quite a few and I've tried to get back to as many people, but these past few months I've really kind of laid pretty low, and I really have been doing a lot of personal work, and I just wanted to take a back seat and step away from kind of everything. So I really kind of wasn't getting too involved in YouTube stuff and things like this, so I just haven't gotten round to responding to a lot of people. But I'll do my best to try and respond to you, and anyone that has sent me a message, I will try to respond to you, even if it is a few months late. I apologise for that, but I do read them and appreciate anyone who reaches out. So yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it. I've actually given myself some cue cards to try and keep myself on track and stop going off on tangents, and hopefully make an informative video for you, dear watcher, and hopefully learn something about this whole concept. Because for me, as an INFJ and just as a person, as an individual, I have found that learning about shame, and especially this whole concept of toxic shame, has been like the missing piece of the jigsaw. And while there are certain elements of being an INFJ that I now realise are natural, and I'm like, oh okay, that has nothing to do with having shame or kind of trauma behind it, that's just being an INFJ, there are other elements that at first I thought were just, you know, normal and healthy, but I've come to realise were not. And that has been a huge help in being able to understand what is normal and healthy and natural as part of my personality as an INFJ, and other things that have in fact been hindering me and holding me back in my life. And now I know that and have that awareness. I've brought it into the light. It is helping me tremendously, and I want to be able to share that with other people now. Okay, so let's get straight into it. What is toxic shame? Toxic shame is essentially a deep feeling that exists in your subconscious mind, because it is something that started at a very young age, and it is a feeling and beliefs and messages that you took on board as a child that made you believe that you as a person, as a human being, were somehow broken or bad or unworthy or unlovable, or, you know, you can substitute any word there that kind of hits home to you. And the difference between toxic shame and healthy shame is normal healthy shame, although it is an uncomfortable feeling, is when we feel that sense of remorse or guilt about something that we've done, an action. And shame is what allows us to learn that in order not to feel this feeling again, we will have to change our behaviour in the future. Imagine two children, and one of the children leans over and pulls the other child's hair until the other child cries. You know, the child thinks he's just playing, but when he realises that he's caused the other child pain because he gets told off or gets scolded by an adult, he understands that it doesn't feel good to feel ashamed for his behaviour, and so hopefully he will remember that you can't really go around in life pulling people's hair until they cry. That is kind of healthy shame. When that shame becomes unhealthy is if the adult who is telling the child off tells that child that they are bad, they're a bad boy for doing that. If that message of being a bad person becomes told over and over again through subsequent experiences, a young child will start to internalize the message that they themselves, or a part of themselves, maybe their exuberant behavior, is not wanted, it is not loved, and it is unworthy of any kind of approval or attention. And this is the beginning of toxic shame. So you can see the difference there. Healthy shame is just understanding that a behavior was not was deemed unacceptable, and you learn from that, and it also acts as self-preservation because it means that you will not suffer the consequences again. Where toxic shame is actually believing the message and internalizing that you as a human being are not loved, are not worthy, and are not wanted, and aren't wanted, essentially. And this happens to children because children do not have the self-awareness to understand that adults and their caregivers are flawed human beings. Children see their caregivers as these kind of like godlike creatures because a child's complete survival depends on their caregivers and adults. So they can't conceive that the people who are there, who are supposed to love and take care of them, might actually be flawed people, and there might be something wrong with them. So a child turns it around and says internally, there's something wrong with me, and that's the reason why I have suffered this abuse from this adult. Now that's a relatively kind of, I guess, the benign beginnings of toxic shame. The most serious cases of toxic shame are when children get molested or physically abused when very young, and they still believe it's because there was something wrong with them and they deserve that punishment. And this then plays out through adulthood and people playing out all kinds of codependent and dysfunctional behaviours. So that is what toxic shame is, essentially, the belief that deep down there is something wrong with you. So in the real world, how does this feel, and why is it such a insidious thing to suffer from? Well, shame by its very nature is shaming, as in most of us don't really mind being seen as being angry, as being maybe even sad. But when it comes to feeling ashamed, that is incredibly painful, and it's something that most of us do our best to always avoid. The reason why, when they do surveys about what is kind of the most mortifying thing a person can imagine themselves doing, the reason why public speaking so often comes out as number one is because it's not so much that people are afraid of going up and trying public speaking and messing up their words or failing, which is the problem. People are deeply, deeply averse to being seen to make a mistake in front of other people and then being seen as being humiliated and embarrassed by it. The actual feeling of feeling ashamed is shaming. It's why people say when they have a situation such as public speaking or, I don't know, being caught naked somewhere, they want the ground to open up and swallow them because of the shame they feel. It is like a complete dissolution of your very being. You don't want to be alive anymore. In fact, I remember seeing some kind of way where they could measure the vibrational frequency of emotions, and shame was second only to the feeling of dying and death in its kind of intensity and heaviness. And it's why a lot of people sometimes actually see shame as equivalent to dying. You know, like when someone dies on stage, it's when they're being shamed in front of people. And that is why it is a deeply powerful emotion, yet an emotion that most people tend to completely hide, suppress and ignore, because no one wants to admit that they feel ashamed, especially being ashamed of themselves as a human being. It is deeply, deeply insidious, and that's why it is termed as being toxic. How does one know if they have toxic shame? Well, I'm just going to use my life and my experience as an example. What I discovered was this feeling of always being judged or walking on eggshells, even when there was no real reason to feel like that. So even if I was walking down a street, even just a quiet street in my own neighbourhood, to go down to the shops to, I don't know, buy some milk or something, I would feel like all eyes were on me. I would imagine that there were people looking out of their windows at me and judging me. And I knew this, I could look around and I could see no one was looking at me, but it was this feeling in the background, and it affected my behaviour. It affected how I held myself, how I walked. It just made me feel super self-conscious of everything. And this was something that I've had for as long as I can remember, so I've just kind of assumed it's normal. And most people do worry about what other people think of them to a certain degree. But when it becomes so all-consuming it becomes stifling, and it starts to affect nearly every decision you make. Then you start to realize that it is become a dysfunctional way of perceiving the world and how you are seen in the world. And that's when you can start to understand that maybe the cause is toxic shame. Another way of kind of trying to work out if you have toxic shame is if you feel like no matter what you do in life, and no matter what you try, you never seem to really make much progress, or nothing really seems to make you feel happy or complete or whole. You always have this sense of emptiness, of hollowness. I like to use the example of in certain game shows there is a game where someone is attached to this big bungee cord, and they have to run down a inflatable corridor to try and grab a prize or to touch a button to win the game. And just when they get near to what it is they're trying to get to, or what they desire to achieve, the bungee cord obviously reaches its full length and the tension kicks in and it pulls them back, right back to square one, right back to where they started from. It's also can be termed as a glass ceiling. You can only go so high in life, and it feels like you start bumping your head and you can't kind of break through this resistance that is kind of holding you down. Again, this is all indicative of having core self-limiting beliefs that usually do exist around some feeling of feeling ashamed about yourself and not feeling good enough. And until a person becomes aware of how these beliefs and these feelings play out in their life, you will always feel almost imprisoned by them. So becoming conscious of toxic shame is just such an incredibly important thing to do. So where does being an INFJ come into this whole concept of toxic shame? Well, like I've already said, toxic shame is something that can affect anybody. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what personality type you are, and I do believe that everybody suffers from shame to some degree, whether it is toxic or whether it is maybe just a less serious version of that. We all, through our experience of being socialized and conditioned by society to fit into this kind of society that we've been born into, we have to to some degree all experience a level of shame surrounding ourselves and our behavior. Now, it is my belief, and this is my opinion, that INFJs are especially susceptible to feelings of toxic shame, mostly by virtue of being born into the rarest personality type. It is said that an INFJ makes up 1 to 2% of the population. INFJ men in particular make up even less, about 0.5% of the population. So INFJs from a very young age will probably become aware, especially as being mostly highly sensitive people as well, and very sensitive to criticism, aware that they are different. They're different from their classmates, they're different from their peers, and maybe they're even very different to their parents. So already an INFJ is kind of primed to be very open and receptive to not only criticism, but through to negative emotional experiences and holding them inside. One of the things that I can remember is, you know, ever since I've been a young child, I always felt kind of slightly different to other people, and especially to classmates going through school. You know, I never quite felt like any conversation that people were having I was really invested in completely. I always felt a sense of kind of distance between myself and other people. And I've always felt this. I had no idea it's to do with being an INFJ, because that's only something I've found and discovered recently. But it is my belief that this kind of just emotional makeup of an INFJ makes them very susceptible to just feeling and understanding that they are different. And because we live in a society that is kind of the polar opposite to how an INFJ operates and sees the world, into how our society expects people to behave and what our society deems as being successful, INFJs for a long time, unless they become aware of, you know, who they are and what they really like and what makes them happy, INFJs can put an amazing, inordinate amount of time and effort into trying to fit themselves in to a particular persona in order to gain approval. This is why INFJs are known as wearing masks and being chameleons and being able to kind of fit into many different social groups, which can be useful. But when you get lost in that because you don't feel like your sense of self is worthy enough, then that becomes obviously debilitating in the long term. Okay, so I think that's as far as I'm going to talk about shame and toxic shame today. I've only just scratched the surface of it and kind of tried to paint quite a broad brush stroke, starting with how it affects an individual and how it goes into society. It is a huge topic, and I think it is an area that is incredibly, amazingly interesting in starting to learn more about yourself and also understanding what is affecting our society. Because as we see things that are happening in the world, it's not exactly a good place or in a good time at the moment, and there are going to have to be some big changes in the future. Yet the way that our kind of mainstream society seems to be heading and our governments seem to be heading doesn't seem to me to make much sense. So I think spreading this kind of message and realizing if you have how shame affects you personally, and if it does, and then seeing how it affects wider society, is just an incredibly useful thing to do in order to move humanity forward in a more positive way. And I do believe emotional intelligence and deepening understanding of emotional intelligence amongst society is the next step for our collective evolution. If we are really want to make this planet a better place, and if we actually want to survive as a human race before we kill each other, because we really need to start to understand why all of this dysfunctional behaviour and destructive behaviour is playing out, because it has definite core underlying reasons that are reflected in each and every one of us. Anyway, thanks for watching. It's great to be back on YouTube and to make a video again. I enjoyed making this one, and I'm going to go way more in depth into a lot of these things because I just can barely explain how useful this has all been for me personally, and I want to share that with other people and also talk about some other more INFJ related stuff as well alongside all of this. Thanks for watching, have a great day and see you soon.